Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this What Three Words webinar on logistics. So the purpose of today really is to take you through a bit more about What Three Words, our technology and the problems that our technology solves. Be showing you specifically what Three Words means for and how it applies to logistics operations. So right from a customer discovering a three-word address to entering it into a checkout, and how that flows through to stuff like route optimization software tools, and then of course fulfillment and last mile delivery. I'm going to be sort of peppering the talk with various examples and show you how others in a similar industry have done this. And really, I mean, we've got a very broad mix of people on the call today, so I'm going to try and keep it as broad as possible. We'll be covering off posts, deliveries, food delivery, large complex supply chain type operations, and much more. So I'm anticipating this to last about 30 minutes. What I'd like to suggest you do is, if you've got any questions, please use the chat feature. And what I do at the end is try and pick those up and get around to answering them. Okay, so let me begin by perhaps stating the obvious, and that is, if you want to move a package from point A to point B, really you need three basic tools. Firstly, you need a map. Then you need some sort of navigation tool, something to get you from point A to point B. But perhaps more fundamentally, you need an address. And whilst services, consumer services like Google Maps and professional mapping tools have done really an excellent job of getting a visual representation of the world in digital form into the hands of the everyday individual. And then you've got navigation tools like Navme or like Google's Waze that enrich that mapping data with anything from traffic information to even where police and speed cameras are currently located. So enriching that data to sort of wrap it up in a navigation experience. Really, with an address, this is the missing part, and the reason is that the world fundamentally is very poorly addressed. So it's so poorly addressed that the UN came up with a statistic in a report fairly recently that suggested as much as 75% of the world's, or at least the world's countries, have inadequate, poor, or no addressing systems. So very much unstructured addressing data. And so here's a really good example. This is an area of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and apart from a set of coordinates, we don't really know much about what is there. Google Maps has done a great job of collecting that mapping data and plotting visual representation of the road networks. But apart from the grey mapping tiles that are indicative of an urban environment, we don't really know anything about it. However, as soon as you switch to satellite mode, you can see this sort of myriad of buildings. It's this dense urban environment. It's actually a place called Rocinha, which is one of Rio's largest favelas and home to about 70,000 people. And obviously, the contrast is pretty stark. Now, this problem of being invisible to a map, if you like, no buildings, no addresses present on that map, just a set of coordinates, is certainly not unique to the people of Rocinha. In fact, the same UN report highlighted about 4 billion people live in a similar way around the world. So very much unstructured data. However, these challenges of addressing are certainly not limited to the 75% of the world that is, for want of a better word, unaddressed. In fact, the other quarter of the world's landmass and countries, you still have these challenges of addressing. It can still be very costly and frustrating to find and refer to places. And so to try and quantify this, Jack Levy, one of the supply chain directors at UPS, effectively looked at this problem and said, if we could save every driver globally 1 mile on their routes per day, this would save us about $50 million as an organization. And whilst addressing isn't the only aspect, of course, that plays into trying to reduce the number of miles that a driver's on the road a day, it's an important factor, as I'll come on to in a moment. So there's a number of falsehoods around traditional street addressing that the majority of people believe. It's something that's so ingrained and I guess so. Especially to someone, in one of those 25% of countries, an addressing system is so ingrained, especially things like the postal code system in the UK. And so, the following examples, I'm going to perhaps highlight some of the misconceptions people have, focusing on the UK because it's most familiar to me. Plus, we have a 50, 60-year-old postal code system that's obviously very, very well established. And the first key thing is that a lot of people believe that a postcode or a zip code will be recognized everywhere. It's like a universal pass. However, if we take just this example, I'm choosing Tesco here because in the last few weeks alone, I've spoken to a couple of partners that have each on an individual consumer level experienced pains when trying to order something online from, in this case, Tesco, because their postcodes or their street addresses weren't recognized. And the challenge is that Tesco, much like many other online retailers, try to enforce address verification. And it's completely understandable. They want to know that a place exists. They want to have coordinates for that particular address. So before they send, pick, pack, and dispatch someone's shopping and get it delivered, they want to make sure that address actually exists. But the challenge is, if you're not, if your address data isn't actually on the main address database, if you like, or if the retailer isn't subscribing to the latest updates of that address database, then actually, you may find yourself in a situation where you physically cannot order goods online because your address is invisible. And of course, this means lost revenue for many retailers, in this case, Tesco. So another falsehood is that you only have one particular road name in a particular district or city or town, and the way that the road naming, street naming, and numbering processes work, especially how it's grown over the years, means that you have multiple road names that share the same name, effectively in a district. And so here's London. Putting Church Road, London into Google, it's not a unique address by any means. There's about 10 or so that show up in the initial results. I think there's actually more. Now, this isn't unique to London, of course, massive metropolis, but there are plenty of other towns and cities with similar road names in a particular district. So many high streets or Oxford streets, for example, as well as, I'm sure, church roads in other cities and towns across the UK alone. And then through globalization, it's no good saying to someone, meet me at Starbucks on Oxford Street. Well, as is evidenced here, there's three, and at their most, they're about a mile or 23-minute walk away from each other. So, well, which one? And you have McDonald's, and you have many of these big brands that are setting up on a particular spot, and so you need that ability to find a more precise location. And then you have real, it's perhaps an edge case, but really interesting quandaries with traditional forms of street addressing. And so, in this case, there's 250 Amond roads. And so, two houses that share the same number on the same road in the same place. Bit of an edge case, but still, nonetheless, it's interesting that these problems occur with a traditional street address. And lastly, a lot of people believe that a postcode or a zip code is accurate enough. If I provide that postcode, not only will it be recognized by the person receiving it, but they'll be able to find me, no problem. Well, actually, if you consider CV47AL, for example, which is the postcode for the University of Warwick, there's 6,000 people that share that one postcode. And as I'll show you a bit later on, there are lots and lots of challenges with postal codes and zip codes and the inaccuracy of them. But of course, the misconception is that it is an accurate way of referring to a place. And so, writing a couple of years ago for the Guardian newspaper in the UK, our now Chief Technology Officer, Gary Gale, wrote that in order to make a geocoder, so basically an address lookup, so geocoding is the process of plotting the coordinates for an address so you can effectively visualize it on a map. So in layman's terms, the ability to search your address on a map and for it to appear. So Gary wrote that in order to make a geocoder that works with 75% accuracy all of the time, in multiple languages, occupies 100% of the time in the dedicated teams. So he's basically then going on to say that getting to the elusive 100% hasn't yet been done and probably never will. So what Gary means by this is there's so many address updates. Considering in the UK alone, out of 41 million official street addresses, about 6% of that database changes every 6 weeks. So huge changes that are being captured. Of course, not all of them are. And then globally, in every language, getting all of that data and keeping it up to date so that every time you search an address into a consumer mapping application, it will be found is nigh on impossible because of all those changes. We're basically chasing our tails, trying to keep up to date with all these street address changes. And so for those 4 billion people that don't really have an address that perhaps we would recognize. If you're not geospatially minded, and this is even the case for when you find yourself trying to find areas or communicate a location in places that don't have street addresses, our instinct is simply to describe where we are, usually in relation to a point of interest. And so this video that's streaming here is the Afghan Postal Service. And so what this guy is doing is effectively going from street corner to street corner, relying on local knowledge and trying to ask these people whether they know where this person lives. And then you have, businesses that list their addresses opposite a particular point of interest, or effectively providing directions because there's no easy way of referring to where they are. But of course, an increasing number of us have access to smartphone technology, and within those smartphones there are GPS receivers, so or at least a GPS. And so what this means is that we're using a pretty precise location reference for where we are much of the time, perhaps without knowing it. So when we use Google Maps or Navme or any of these navigation or geolocation tools, we're using effectively a set of coordinates behind the scenes. But the trouble is, when you're trying to refer to that point or communicate it, no one really actually uses the coordinates apart from computers. So unless you're perhaps geospatially minded, you're into hiking, for example, no one says, or at least in the context of logistics, no one enters 25 degrees 9 minutes 40.918 seconds south into a checkout. Can't say I've ever experienced that, and I've previously run e-commerce stores in the past. And so we effectively, with these challenges in mind, decided to create a global addressing system that was based on latitude and longitude, because, like I said, the majority of people, at least in certain countries and an increasing number globally, have access to this technology. So they have access to precise location. But we decided to create an addressing layer over the top of it. So effectively what we did was we devised an algorithm that divided the entire planet into a grid. And the grid comprises of 3 meter squares, just like this one, so about 10 foot by 10 foot. And for every single one of those squares, we gave it a unique 3-word address. So as simple as taking 3 dictionary words like table, chair, and spoon, and applying it as an address. So we've done this for every single one of the 57 trillion squares across the planet. And so what this means, in simple terms, is going back to Gary's quote where he said, getting to that elusive 100% hasn't yet been done and probably never will. Well, actually, as Gary, of course, now being our chief technology officer is fully aware, using what 3 words, that elusive 100% has actually been achieved. And so it's as simple as discovering the 3 words for where you currently are or where you want something sent to. So finding those 3 words and quoting them. So bids, inches, coast, for example, as you can see on the corner here of Hyde Park, finding those 3 words that it's fixed that location, they'll never change, and it's been pre-assigned. And so it's as simple as discovering it, quoting it to someone, and if they enter it into our technology or an app that supports our technology, they'll be able to find exactly where you mean. So we chose words for this system because, well, numbers already exist, but of course people don't use them because they're very, very complex in nature to use. And of course, we converse as human beings using words. Street addresses, apart from the house number, of course, and the parts of the postcode system, are based on words as well. And so, if you look at the ability for a human being to remember 3 words in comparison to, say, a postcode or even a latitude and longitude on the other end of the scale, it's incredibly, incredibly high. So people remember and use them in everyday conversation. Of course, words are universal, so you can write them on signage, create house signs, you can text them to people, WhatsApp, you name it. They're, of course, universal in the way they can be communicated. And now a bit about the technology itself. So for those that have already played around with what 3 words, you may have noticed a few things, and hopefully I can explain those with some clarity now. And what we've done with the bits I'm about to say is really try and create a system that is superlative, or is effectively removes all of the ambiguity when it comes to communication of location, and make it as simple as possible for people to pick up and start using. And so the first thing that we have done that's clever with the algorithm is we've placed the shorter and very simple words in towns and cities. So essentially, where there is a highest, the highest likelihood of what 3 words being used, we've placed easier words there because people would prefer to use easier words. But in the oceans and other places, you find lengthier words. The second thing that we've done, and this is where we really quite drastically contrast to traditional forms of location reference, is that Word3Words is non-hierarchical. And what I mean by that is we've placed similar looking but still valid 3-word addresses so far apart from each other that it's very, very obvious when a mistake has been made. So table, chair, lamps, plural, is on the completely in a completely different country on a completely different continent to table, chair, lamp, singular. And this is repeated, this pattern, with all similar looking. Similar with, in word order, for example. So if you went lamps, table, chairs, for example, it would be somewhere completely different. And so what this means is, in a logistics context, someone enters the wrong 3-word address, you can still correct that error and route a package directly to them and to their correct location. The third thing that we've done is we've made the system multilingual because, of course, whilst English, of course, is spoken very, very widely. One major aspect of what we're doing is localizing, so it makes it even easier for people to pick up and start using. And our goal is absolutely that everyone will be able to use Word3Words in their local language or the language they're most familiar with at some point. So as of right now, we're in 13 different languages, and we've got some really pretty substantial languages coming up like Arabic, Hindi, Bengali, and so on. But there's a really interesting pattern that we've adopted with the localization. And that is that wherever you are in the world, there'll effectively be currently 13 different ways of referring to it. So one per language. But depending on where you are in the world and the language that's spoken there, there'll be either complex or simple words. So in Moscow, for example, you'll find 3 very common Russian words, but 3 less common Kiswahili words, for example. But the reverse is true for Kenya, where, of course, Kiswahili is spoken as a language, but Russian perhaps is spoken less. And so that's the pattern that we've adopted throughout the world. And finally, the technology is available offline. So this is the really, really powerful thing with it. It doesn't matter if you don't have a data or a cell connection, you can still run the Word3Words technology because it runs solely on the phone's GPS or a device's GPS. And so the file size, so because it's an algorithm, there's no database, there's no no need to connect online to find a location. The entire algorithm itself sits onto a file of about 10 or so megabytes. So it's a really, really slim file, can be added to any smartphone application, and can run offline, even a basic Android device. And our broad goal with the technology is that everyone will be able to use Word3Words in their local language wherever they use location. So when absolutely ordering stuff online, having goods delivered to them, tourism, travel applications, when transacting with the government's emergency services, and all of these applications where we are used to using location or addresses. Okay, so on to delivery use cases then. So we're used in a broad range of delivery applications, and I've drawn together some of the common use cases, or the most common use cases that people are using us for in delivery. So there's there's 2 types here. So I'm splitting out permanent and temporary. So the permanent, which I'm going to focus on for the purpose of this webinar, are primarily addresses that you cannot search on a map. So those 4 billion people that don't have an address. As well as I'll come to shortly, folks in 25% of countries that still don't really have an address that you can search on a map. So unstandardized, descriptive, or non-recognizable addresses. But then there's new builds. There's deliveries to buildings where the entrance is not, the same access point as the main street address, or the entrance may be on the adjacent street. When dealing with multiple entrances or exits, like stadiums, hospitals, and so on. Addresses when you need to verify someone's location for a sensitive delivery, and of course international addresses where you just don't recognize what's coming through on the checkout screen. And then there's temporary stuff. So absolutely, Word3Words is perfect for things like drone delivery, same day delivery. So someone spontaneously is ordering a picnic to the middle of the park. Temporary buildings, for example. So we've got people using us for, like delivering asphalt to highways where there's no address, but you still need something delivered there. And then, of course, events and major festivals. So in its most basic form, there's 3 steps for this. So the first is that you need a customer or someone to communicate their 3-word address to you. Then the second thing is our API will convert that to a set of coordinates, so you can see it on a map. And then the third thing is the driver then actually delivering to that set of coordinates using some sort of navigation tool. That's the really, really basic workflow. Let me extrapolate that right now. So the first thing is capturing that 3-word address. So the simplest way of doing this is just simply asking the customer for that address. So a single line on a checkout, and I'm going to be using this example here of Goli Alhosriesmas, which is a 3-word address in Rocinha, the same favela I mentioned earlier on. So it's as simple as adding that single line checkout box, because what 3 words, of course, the syntax, it fits on one line, unlike a lengthy street address. And of course, you can start to do stuff like if you're an international store and you have problems in Brazil but not in the UK, you can then add conditional logic, so only display this field for users in Brazil, for example. So I mentioned earlier on the technology shuffling these similar 3-word addresses very far apart. There's via our API, there's a number of flavors of effectively an auto suggest capability. So here we go. This is using standard blend, which is our sort of out of the box auto suggest. And what's happening here is as the user enters a 3-word address, we're suggesting searches, rather like a Google search. And based on the user's location, you can then start to limit results to, say, the UK or the US, or have preference to certain over the other, just to help them find that address pretty quickly. And so an example then using some sort of geofencing, in this case with a 3-word address, is Blowhorn, who provide a 2-man delivery operation in 3 cities in India, so Bangalore, Chennai, and Hyderabad. So they need to make sure that what a user enters is actually in the same city as the origination point. So here we go. I've entered Hairspray Mentions Field, which is in Bangalore. But as I try to enter Table Lamp Spoon, it's throwing the result out because it knows that it's not in Bangalore. And of course, they're using our API in a slightly different way, but it goes to show that there's that verification that a destination is in the same city. So one of the the challenges we know that it is prevalent, of course, across online stores is not wanting to make too many checkout changes, or at least throw out or increase churn or play around with that experience, which is completely understandable. So one of the really, really simple ways, or the sort of invisible integration of what 3 words, if you like, is just using that elusive that other delivery information field, which exists on most checkouts. So usually people enter stuff like, please leave the package in the porchway, or phone me 30 minutes prior to delivery. Of course, you can very, very simply use that field to capture a 3-word address and provide some education to the customer around that. And what could be interesting there is then starting to measure, and of course, based on the reception and a particular trial, then implement 3-word address proper as a checkout field. And the other alternative then, if you're not comfortable adding particular fields to a checkout, as well as utilizing that other delivery information, once you've captured the initial order, you can then ask the customer to find the 3-word address to enhance the delivery, perhaps incentivize them with a discount next time, or quick delivery, for example. So after you've captured the order, the customer's paid you, you've got that order already, it's not going to affect any churn rate, you can then get them to capture the 3-word address. And so taking this a step further, one of our partners, Experian Data Quality, who are a global company, provide many checkout and address verification solutions to pretty major e-commerce stores. They're adding what 3 words, the universal search bar. And so you can start adding in this case, searching the UK address database. You can start to throw in, certain words to try and pick up a street address, but in the same search bar, you can then also add a 3-word address. So again, you're not changing anything. You're using that existing single search bar that has both a street address and or a 3-word address capability. So once you've captured that 3-word address, really that's a key. That's once you have that 3-word address, you've got the customer's accuracy for their front door, or whatever the delivery point is, to a degree of accuracy of 3 meters. And so the simplest thing to do at this point is to geocode it. So you want to throw those 3 words to our API, and you want our API to return the latitude and longitude, so effectively position on a map. And then you can do things like visualize this, so you can send this back to the customer in a confirmation screen and say, great, thank you, here's your 3-word address, Goli Alhosriesmas, is this where you are, please confirm. And so Mmarket in Mongolia, a sort of Amazon.com for Mongolia, do just this. So customer orders, they enter their 3-word address in Mongolian, and then it gives them a quick map to say, is this correct? Is this where you are? And allows the customer just to verify. So once you've got that lat long, so you've geocoded 3 words, that effectively runs. I mean, pretty much all route optimization systems and delivery scheduling systems and so on use lat long as a universal identifier. And so you've already got that key without having to make any changes to the software or your software provider. But there are also 3-word addresses friendly route optimization and scheduling tools, like in this case, RouteXL. So actually schedule and say what's the optimum route between these points. And of course, oftentimes for the first time, if you've captured a 3-word address, you've got a precise location, you can offer a customer a timed delivery, for example, whereas before that would be almost impossible. And then there's others that are 3-word address friendly, like Gertam, Black Bay, and various other scheduling and dispatch systems. So 3-word address, it's a single line, it's a unique syntax, so words.words.word, and it can be added really, really simply onto a packaging label. So here we go, Gole al Hosriasmas, you can see is on this single line here of this package. And so if the driver needs a quick reference, they can't find that property, they can simply enter those 3 words into a navigation tool and find the customer's front door if they're disconnected for whatever reason. And in this case, we've got it in addition to a street address. So it provides the last mile fulfillment or an additional bit of help for the customer. The driver. And so, there's various navigation tools that, again, if you have the lat long already, if you've pre-geocoded it, you can use whatever tools you're currently using that support lat long to do stuff like multi-destination drops. But there's also a bunch of navigation tools like Navme, for instance, or Infoware, who provide DHL with navigation systems and various other tools that allow a 3-word address to be entered directly offline. So Navme here allow the customer to run 3-word address and navigate to the front door offline. So as I'll show you in a second, we've got partners that effectively use Navme in collaboration with 3-word address. They can pick it up off a label or they can pick it up anywhere and just enter it into the navigation tool and be taken straight to the customer. So all of this, of course, means that if you have a precise location, you can deliver a lot more efficiently. The customer is happy, especially in this case with food deliveries, where obviously not having a precise location means that food can get cold, which means really unhappy customers and, of course, lost revenue. So precise reference means more efficient delivery, means happier customer. So on to some examples then. So the first example then is going back to the favelas, Rocinha, where the Correios or the National Postal Service don't deliver. We are used by an organization named Group Carteira Amiga, who basically pick up the postal services business in those areas. And so people living in the favelas can add 3-word addresses when ordering stuff online. And effectively Carteira Amigo will deliver using our free app to those customers. Now, the interesting thing they do is that if the customer doesn't yet have their 3-word address, they're discovering it at the front door and they're giving them a quick sticker to say, here's your 3-word address. So next time you order online, quote these 3 words and we'll find you quicker. Another organization that are doing something pretty similar to Group Carteira Amigo is Aiza Express. So Aiza operates a medicine delivery company, usually with cycle couriers, and they operate out of townships in South Africa. So again, similar sort of infrastructural challenges as the favelas in Brazil, but of course this time in South Africa. And with medicine deliveries, of course, they're pretty time pertinent. And so what they do is very, very similar to Carteira Amigo. So they're capturing 3-word addresses. Here you go, you can see them sticking it on the customer's shipping label, and they're delivering those goods using the What 3 Words app directly to the customer. So really, again, very, very simple workflow, just using the application, they're visualizing using satellite imagery, visualizing the customer's properties, and just using the free offline compass tool to be navigated straight to the customer's front door. So moving up the east coast then of Africa, with food delivery then. So I mentioned earlier on with food delivery, obviously, they're really, really time sensitive because, of course, you can't rely on food to go cold and still rely on customers being happy. So one of the challenges Deliver Addis had was in Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. Again, similar addressing challenges to many other places that were being used within. And they were relying on customers to either drag a pin on a map, so basically to try and find their house remotely, or they were relying on people providing, you can see the field there, additional details about the location. So asking for things like landmarks, for example. And so it's obviously not a great customer experience asking someone to drag a map each time and try and figure out exactly where they want something shipped to. Because people kind of it's pretty difficult to read these maps anyway sometimes. To identify exactly where your property is, and especially in the checkout experience, is not particularly great. So what they've done is simply add 3-word addresses in English. We're not an Amharic yet, so they just have a quick tooltip that says exactly what 3 words is, and you can add it. So that enables precise pinpointing of the location without having to drag maps or provide a landmark type description of that property. Another challenge I mentioned earlier on, or at least one of the misconceptions I highlighted, was around university campuses. And hospitals are very, very similar. So a hospital typically will have one street address, but obviously pretty enormous buildings on the most part. Many, many different entrances, exits, lots of individual business or operational units within that hospital. And so Onibag, they again are a cycle courier, and they're delivering usually pretty time sensitive and also by the nature of the products, pretty sensitive deliveries. So, blood samples, for example. And so instead of relying on signage or asking for directions, they can capture a 3-word address for example, the front door to the lab unit, and then using their cycle couriers, just very, very quickly find those places offline. So great for big industrial type sites or buildings where there's multiple entrances or exits or only share one address. So moving from the US there into the UK, so we work with, one of our users is an organisation called Direct Today Couriers. And Direct Today have a fleet of about 100 vehicles, 100 drivers, and they deliver within the UPS networks. They're a subcontractor of UPS. And so they operate in 3 counties, 2 of which are particularly rural in the UK. And so they struggle with addressing because, many houses in the countryside in the UK, the street names, if they exist, or at least the house numbers and house names, quite often don't geocode. So you can't really rely on entering them into a map and finding them. So what they're doing here is, they've got a challenge. If they can't find a customer, historically a courier would have to phone a customer and say, hey, where are you? I'm lost. Can you just direct me to your property? But what Direct Today are doing here is they're simply remotely finding, using satellite imagery on our map online, they're finding the front door reference to a particular customer's property. They're communicating that to the driver. The driver's using the offline NavMe app, so a satellite navigation app that supports what 3 words input offline, and they're finding the customer's front door in addition to the postcode and other spatial data, like maybe a village name, for example. And so, just using this really quite simple workflow, they've reduced their daily undelivered, or at least undelivered first-time parcels from around 30 each day to just 4 or 5. So obviously you get huge operational efficiencies and cost savings just from that pretty simple workflow. On a much grander scale, in terms of sort of global carriers and major international carriers, we're working with Aramex, for example. So Aramex are adopting and rolling out what 3 words across their entire e-commerce operations. And we're actually developing and very, very soon to be releasing Arabic as a 3-word address language. So that means that people can order online when maybe someone in the Middle East is ordering from UK retailers, or even within the Middle East from a particular national retailer. They can order online using a 3-word address in Arabic, soon to be, or English, and Aramex will deliver and fulfill to that 3-word address. So when you have a post, for example, where there's quite often that they're part of the public domain, or if they're privatized, they obviously have an obligation to deliver and are sort of governed by various requirements to deliver packages, letters, and so on and so forth, as well as often financial services and otherwise to residents in a particular country. When you've got that level of infrastructure, but still have challenges of addressing, rolling out what through us not only increases and helps the operational efficiency of the organization, as in the case here of the Mongolian Postal Agency, who we've just started working with, but also it helps in the sort of wider ecosystem and people that use addresses in that country. So as a result of us working with the Mongolian Postal Agency, we've developed a Mongolian language of three-word addressing. We've released a bespoke What Three Words Mongolian app. So now people can get stuff delivered from the Mongolian Postal Agency by three-word address, soon to be. And then we find that tourist boards, for example, and e-commerce stores and the wider ecosystem are using three-word addressing. So there's this sort of groundswell of people just adopting, but obviously it's initially instigated by a postal operation and service for their particular purpose. And so this model's it's working brilliantly, and we've got various others that are following suit. So where you've got that national level of infrastructure and interest, there's obvious knock-on positive effects of adopting three-word addressing. So that sort of ends the examples section of the webinar. Wanted to sort of address a couple of questions that I'm sure some of you have right now. The first is, okay, well, how does someone actually go about discovering their three-word address? So there are several means here. The first and most obvious one is we provide free technology, free consumer apps for Android and iOS devices, and just simply using our online map. We provide that technology so consumers can find, using maps, using satellite imagery, using their phones, geolocation servers, find their three-word address, find the three-word address for their front door or anywhere in the world and navigate to them. So that's the first way. Obviously, that's quite reliant on someone actually having the app in the first place when you're looking at challenge as well. But incidentally, there's hundreds of other applications and tools that also support what three words, and I'll explain in a moment what our model is, but there's various others, so you don't necessarily need the what three words app to be able to discover your three-word address. The second and really interesting way of giving customers their three-word address and discovering it is when your drivers are visiting those sites anyway and visiting the front door to a customer. They can simply discover the three-word address at the front door, and much like is happening in Brazil and South Africa, give the customer their three words. So once they have them, they can save it. Three words won't change; they'll just remember them. So next time they can order online or order wherever, they can ship to that three-word address, and you have a more precise reference for them. So don't have to go through the painful process of trying to find the customer, phone the customer, and so on and so forth. So, this can be done in a number of ways. I mean, as basic as having stickers, writing it down from our mobile app, but also you can integrate it within proof of delivery applications. So once you're delivering, you can sign and give the customer a three-word address all within that one unified experience. Or if you're delivering, with a delivery note or some sort of slip, you can write down 3 words, give it to the customer, and all of those, upper workflows. And then finally, and perhaps most interestingly, is marketing, and actually promoting what 3 words to customers and to get them discovering their 3-word address, that one-time discovery, and so when they come to order, they can use that. And so one of the one interesting idea around that is using owned media. So media, whether it's packaging, whether it's a pizza box, for argument's sake, or using your own channels online like email marketing or simply displaying stuff on a website, using that own media to encourage people to discover their 3 words or give them their 3-word address so they have it, so the next time they're ordering, they can then just order using those 3 words. So to wrap up then, so this global addressing system, it's available off the shelf and easy to implement. So every 3-word address on the planet, so every 3 meters square rather, has a unique reference already in 13 languages and very many more to come soon. So there's no need to create any random codes, for example, and quote people. That it's just available off the shelf and works offline. Helps increase efficiency, engage new markets, so people that don't have an address that perhaps you don't currently deliver to, of course you can now accept orders from them, and all of this results in happier customers. And should append to that statement that because what 3 words is based solely on latitude and longitude, which of course is the global location language, at least so far as mapping and technology is concerned, we are that layer over the top. So we just enable lat long to be communicated. So once you've captured those 3 words, you can run an entire supply chain without really making too many changes, just from making that single call to our API to convert to the lat line. So without too much effort, you can pretty easily implement What3 Words. We've got a scalable pricing tier. So we provide free consumer applications, free maps online to help people discover the concept and discover their 3-word address. And then we provide business-grade tools, APIs, to enable anyone to integrate What3 Words within any technology they possibly can. And we charge a very small amount to do so. And it's all scalable, so it's based on effectively the number of address lookups you make. And there's always a free tier as well. So if you're a very small application, chances are you may not pay us, but if you're starting to deliver and increase operational efficiency and generate income using 3-word addressing, then we charge a very small amount to be able to do so. And then we've got various implementation and engagement toolkits. So, lots of know-how, lots of best practice to help engage people to discover their 3-word address or just start implementing 3-word address. Loads of code libraries, wording, multiple languages, all of that good stuff to help people discover the concept and for you to start using and onboarding 3-word addressing. So I mentioned the apps. So these are the apps, very, very simple, available in the Google Play or Android, Google Play or the iOS store. So go ahead, download and start playing around. They're about to be revamped very, very soon to add additional functionality. But really, our product, the apps, the maps online, they're really sort of discovery tools. We purposely limit the functionality because actually we'd rather people use an alternative tool to interact with 3-word addressing because it's so much more powerful in that sense. So a good example is, we'd rather than us building a navigation device, we'd rather a sat-nav app integrate What3 Words. And so, in order to enable that, we provide APIs and we provide offline SDKs to enable any developer to plug What3 Words into the project, as simple as a couple of lines of code. So, Better Us, we're used in over 170 countries, including in one we've, I believe, got 3% of the population using What3 Words. So we've got loads and loads of users and integrations across the world, ranging from humanitarian to tourism and travel. Of course, logistics I've covered off today, national infrastructure, national mapping agency, big geospatial tools, navigation devices, and loads of consumer services that are just adding What3 Words to improve customer experience. Make things less frustrating when dealing with location. So our vision is to make the world a more efficient, a less frustrating, and a safer place. I hope you share that vision. It's been a pleasure to host everyone, so many people, and from so varied backgrounds and such varied organizations. I will be very, very happy in a moment to answer questions on chat, but if anyone has any specific queries or would like to discuss anything or just receive more information, then feel free to drop me an email. My email is there. But thank you very much.